Welcome back to Cedarburg. Today we are actually going to be working on a bunch of smaller projects to help give our city a little bit more character or personality. This is something that I think is important because since Cities 2 has been out, I'm still trying to find what some of those character or personality attributes I can add to cities are. So if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with any questions you have. And speaking of questions, I am working on some helpful guides and tip videos to get you caught up on some helpful information for playing Cities 2. For now, let's get to it. So in our last video, we focused very heavily on infrastructure and getting an interchange to connect the highway system to the city itself. Now that that's set up, I think we can start focusing on what this inner city area towards the river is going to look like. Now, I don't know about you all, but I've talked a lot about trying to shift the way that I build and finding opportunities to focus on some detail elements as well to give the city more personality. Because right now, I don't really feel like a lot of my builds and practice builds have that. So part of our focus with this city is building on this coastline. And one thing with Cities 2 that I have to keep in mind is that the coastline changes in height as you progress upriver. So there is a little bit of a challenge there to make sure you just don't flood your city. So instead of extending this sort of key road as far as we can and making it like infinity long, I thought we should transition a little bit away from that and actually feature a walking path near the water. I have found that adding some paths into different city blocks and stuff like that has helped me, I don't know, do some things different with what I'm building. I've been focusing on creating like little parks and things like that around areas where, especially where the zoning is a little bit wonky, and trying to feature some of these little just pedestrian pathways, right, to interconnect different blocks. I've also been looking at other general ways of doing some things different, like a different way to build out suburbs and make some areas more distinctive. It's very easy to get in this habit of just making big grids and just filling everything with zoning. And that is easy to do, but it also doesn't seem to give it a ton of personality, nor does it look like anything specific to you. So I'm trying to find ways of incorporating things that I like into the city, given some of the new tools and also some of the limitations, considering I am used to playing a pretty heavily modded version of Cities. Now, in messing around a little bit off camera, I actually tried a little bit more of an organic design here with the pathing, but I kept having these weird connection points to the road itself. I hope that's something we can either get a mod for and update eventually so that not every like angle that it hits the road has to be straight on without it looking crooked as it connects to the road. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but it's driving me a little bit bonkers sometimes when I'm trying to do pathways and then connecting them, that those couple of feet that are attached to the road just aren't aligned with the rest of the path. I'm also going to redo the highway pathing here so that it goes over this road instead of touching the ground. Even though I do like the fill beneath the highway, this is probably going to get rid of it, but I think this will look a little bit better to have this overlap. Not to mention it continues to give us connectivity to the other side of the highway and some continuity in some of the road design. How are you guys finding the terraforming tools? I'm finding these situations where I end up going back kind of repeatedly to fix things, or I'm having to balance, you know, okay, smooth out, then level, then smooth out and level to try to extend land or get it the way I want. It's kind of an interesting challenge. I've noticed some benefits from changing the brush size a little bit more proactively to get a better, result in certain areas. I think this is mainly reflected in dealing with like water edges and stuff like that, coastlines, where I'm having to do a little bit more work than I want to kind of smooth things out or make things look the way I want. I was just building something on stream and I had a area that I wanted to level out, and upon leveling it out, there was an underwater ground source, which you can't get rid of. So that's an interesting challenge that I end up having to like terraform and work with, but it was hard to see how much water was actually there. So I didn't know how deep to make this new lake I was going to have. Like, that was a little bit of an interesting experience. So now you can obviously see how the highway is connected to the interchange that is on our side of the river, and you can probably kind of get an idea of what I'm trying to go for here. I want this area to be pretty compact in a way. And while a lot of this is low density residential, I see some of this being upgraded as we continue. Maybe this is an area of townhomes. I think it could be a really cool pocket of town outside of the downtown, right? That we'll probably upgrade to as we continue expanding. I've mentioned this before in some of the other episodes that my intention is really to start at like low density areas and then slowly build it up into what I think it can be eventually. And some of that is because I think that's how Cities 2 lends itself to be played, but also because I really do think that that's a neat way to sort of transition your city. A lot of folks have talked about the evolution of their city in Cities 2 and how that seems like that's more of a viable approach. So we're going to try it here. So you may have noticed that I added a parking lot underneath this highway, and that is meant to be for the walking path next to the river, really. But What I think is kind of interesting is I do feel like the having parking lots kind of helps with your downtown areas. So that's another element that I think you can use for detailing. And it's something I'm trying to get in the habit of utilizing more, especially for things like schools or certain buildings where you might expect a parking lot or a bigger parking lot than maybe what exists with the asset itself. Now, I don't know if I'm going to keep these townhomes here for the duration of this build. I noticed that the zoning is slightly off, and that was probably something I should have fixed earlier. But what I kind of want to do is have some paths that are incorporated into this block. So I'm going to set this up, and we're going to see how it looks over time. And then we'll go from there as to whether we need to upgrade to a different sort of zoning density. But again, these paths have helped me sort of combine areas and make things look a little bit more finished, I guess, in a way, or I don't know, deliberate. To some degree, especially incorporating them around townhomes. I did some city blocks on stream where I took them and I had the townhomes only for so many units inside of the city block, and then I surrounded them with pathing and stuff, and it looked very nice. It's just finding opportunities to do that without it getting super repetitive as well. And in some situations, I'm seeing a decent amount of traffic flow too, in terms of pedestrian traffic, utilizing some of these to get to different places, which is always helpful because, you know, right now we don't have the ability to sort of district a park area, which I think is something that this would really, really need to be super helpful. Is just have little areas that we could do and then be able to zone it, or not zone it, but district it for a park. And then you can have some of that better traffic, sort of like we had in CS1. We were able to set up parks, and that basically gave it additional functionality beyond just a walking path. And of course, let's add some trees into some of these pockets. And I'm going to utilize trees to fill in some areas of zoning that just don't look ideal, especially really dense trees, and make it look filled up like it's, again, pretty intentional, so that we can try to eliminate some awkward gaps in some of the zoning, because obviously that can be a little bit of a struggle. It's moments like these where I'm trying to place down trees and I'm getting a bunch of overlap notifications that I really, really hope to have some basic mods. And if you watch my 10 mods for Cities 2 video that I made, there's just a few things that I think would add a ton of quality of life to Cities 2 and give us, you know, a little bit more flexibility on what we're doing right now. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of another city block of townhomes. And the idea here is that we are going to grow this area up a little bit in terms of the zoning itself. So we're going to dezone it and we're going to set it up to have something else here. So theoretically, from the river, you'll see townhomes, maybe, or a row of townhomes on the coastline, depending on how things look as we continue to progress. And then I want to transition into medium density and then maybe eventually some high density here as well. It just depends on, I guess, how it all starts coming together. I need to figure out kind of where our suburbs are going to be placed. But for the next bit, you're going to see me slowly transitioning from low density into some bigger buildings. And something that I'm probably going to set up a video on at some point in the near future is how to kind of like fix some of your demand. There's some issues where I've noticed that demand isn't really, it's not quite balanced, but there's also some drop off in terms of demand for things like offices, especially when you start getting in that high density realm where you really want to build up your downtown. You may see a lack of demand there. And I found some fixes for that. Some creator friends of mine have also given some suggestions, and I use those in some of my early access videos, and they have worked ever since. Whenever I have an issue and drop off in some like medium density or higher density areas, I've seen like a real jump. So I may make a video focused on that, because we are going to run into that same issue here, I think, because I can already tell I'm kind of following the same trends. But if you are looking for an early tip on how to help control some of that, really focus on education. Someone mentioned that in a comment, I think, on the community tab, which is really important for you guys to check out, because I do post some questions to help figure out what videos we should be working on, as well as posting some updates as to what's on the way. But education is a big factor in demand, especially as you progress your city. So make sure you are getting your education set up. And that is something that we really haven't done too much of besides just having the school in place. So now that we have this little mid-city park in, I think that might be a nice feature sort of in the middle of town. I'm going to go ahead and get our district set up for these two sides of this one kind of artery road that runs down the middle. And we'll be probably expanding and tweaking these districts as we progress, but I just want to go ahead and get them in place so that as I continue to expand services and we grow population, we do have some sort of markers for the different parts of the community. And as you can see, we got a car wreck. I don't know if you guys have looked at this though. Have you guys had cars flying off the road? I think that is wild to see a car accident. The car is, 50, 100 feet away from the road itself. And speaking of cars away from the road, I want to get rid of some of these cars that are parked at the side of the road. So I'm going to try to find roads and avenues that we can add trees or grass to, or extend the sidewalk size. And then we'll need to incorporate parking lots as we continue to open up the city and make some changes here. I do need to try to figure out where the city's going to go beyond the highway. Obviously, we have an industry pocket that's kind of the top right if you're, if the river's at the bottom, that I still feel like could be way better developed besides just being a block of industry. I just don't really know how to incorporate some of that into the city build yet. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and extend this highway out so that we can plan for roads that are going to cross this. I also think this highway might actually turn and go back across the river or go through part of what may end up being downtown in the, distant future. But what I want is some sort of major road that crosses over this to head over to the other side of the highway. And that'll help, figure out where we're going to go and maybe break away from the grid at some point, away from the downtown part of the city. Now, we covered up a lot of the terrain height change for part of this highway utilizing the fill road. For over here, I'm actually just going to leave it sloped, and I'm going to sort of fill the slope with trees that'll hopefully grow and kind of give a barrier for sound, basically, between our residential area and the highway itself. And then we will also need to plan probably for another interchange here soon as we continue to extend this further along the city. It wouldn't hurt to have a couple of options for traffic, especially depending on what we do as we move north or above the highway itself. Better go ahead and start planting some of these trees. This is definitely the best season in the game in terms of what trees look like. Besides just having, your summer green, there's just something great about the autumn trees. I hope that one day we have a mod or something like that we can just stay in autumn. It's kind of funny because in CS1, we often we're trying to create autumn, right? Somehow by utilizing assets from the workshop. And now that we have the option of autumn, it's not really an option. I just want to stay in autumn. So building this overpass, what I realized is I just don't really love roads or bridges and things to be angled. I like them to be pretty level, or as level, as I can get within reason. So this is one of those instances where I had to find a little bit of a workaround because I can't really get it to be perfectly level unless I level both sides of the road, which kind of makes sense, right? But I can't do that without leveling the terrain, which I think is kind of interesting. It kind of seems that Cities 2 is very reactive to the height that you're working on, and it can be difficult to match a height that you have something at when you go back and make an update, right? So if I built a highway here and I went and came back to that height, obviously I have snapping to rely on, but if you're trying to match it perfectly, sometimes you end up with little bumps in it. I thought that was kind of interesting as I played with it, and I know that probably sounds kind of goofy, but to some degree, I have found instances where it's just hard to figure out exactly what level I'm working on if I come back to something. I noticed that, for example, with doing some of the key roads on the rivers, where you run into this little bit of an issue of okay, I need to match a height, but instead I was getting bumps in almost in the node itself. I don't know. I feel like I may just be ranting about something that's kind of obvious. There's just something there that doesn't always connect for me in terms of how some of the heights work. You can obviously get your snapping to be a varied set of heights, in terms of your distance between different tiers, I guess. But for some reason, I was having a little bit of an issue matching some of that, especially doing certain roads. So I found it sometimes easier just to terraform and then build the road to that and then remove the terraform to fix it. Not to mention, you probably saw me struggling a little bit with the fact that the road wanted to combine with the highway, which is just one of those unfortunate moments where the game is being so intuitive, it's maybe a little too intuitive. So I've expanded some of our infrastructure up to the highway that we were just working on, and I'm going to go ahead and zone and put in a bunch of residential. Again, I think I'm going to tailor these residential areas a little bit later, but I also feel like this may be an area that'll continue to evolve. So while it's low density now, it may not be low density in the future. You can probably sort of see the direction I'm going in at this point, but one other area I need to remedy somehow, because it's just an eyesore, is fixing this side of our river, and I don't really know how I'm going to go about that. I'm also confused as to why we have the sewage dump here and we're not seeing brown water, but I guess that's something to solve a different day. So we've done little tidbits to add personality to the city. It's very minor stuff, but I think it starts to set a little bit of an idea as to what we could be doing as we move forward. And I think that's an important sort of conversation to bring up occasionally, because again, it is easy to just zone full blocks and move on and not really stress about trying to find some things that you can add to your city. And one thing I think about detailing is that it often gives us the ability to give a city, something unique about it, right? And those are things that we want, because we do want each city that we build, and we are going to build multiple cities, something that sort of defines itself. And right now, based on the tools we have, without going into dev mode and doing something wild, we do have to find, some tools and some of the basic things that we have, right? So that may be utilizing different roads and maybe using, pedestrian paths. And that's something I'm going to lean on a little bit more, is pedestrian pathing and creating small parks in areas, whether they're going to be used to the extent that, you can make a park be used in cities 1, probably not. But if we can create little areas that, seem to have a purpose, I think that'll give us a little bit of what we're looking for. And somebody that is playing this and that is a good friend of mine is Canadian Moose Plays. And I have to give him a big shout out, because he does a very good job of giving each of his cities, especially like cities 1, when he had all the tools. And even now he's learning how to do it with cities 2, like we all are, is giving those cities something that is, personal to them, that is specific to them, that adds some variety between doing city builds. Because it's easy, like, again, just to lay down the zones and move on and build another city. And a lot of times, the way we set up our cities are something specific, right? Like, you may do a tropical city, you may do this or that the next time, and that can be some of those personality elements that you're looking for. But ultimately, detailing across the board typically gives every city something. That was something I brought up with other creators too, is like, just detailing is the personality, man. That's where you really get it. So it's like trying to figure out how to do that on this basis. And Moose does a very good job of that. And you'll see how he does like suburbs now and how he's playing with some of these ideas. And I think we're going to lean on borrowing some of those ideas for what we're going to be doing later on. So if you haven't checked him out, I'll put a link down in the description, but I would highly recommend it, because he's definitely one of the inspiring creators to watch. But some of the things he's been doing and playing around with, for example, is using alleyways instead of some of your roads to create suburb roads, which I think is really a smart idea. And then you can use some pedestrian pathing in some areas to give it like this walkway that's separated from the road. So it almost looks like you've inserted grass, but there's a little bit more distance there, and it looks very clean if done very well. Also, changing zone size, I think, will be a really, really handy tool as we continue to expand the city, especially in the suburbs and in some different areas, of course. So I think there's definitely some ideas out there. It's just figuring out how to apply them now. And that's something I really want to focus on over the next couple episodes, because you guys are typically used to me doing a lot of detail work. And so far, it's just like I'm still trying to find my way through the game and some of the new mechanics and how things look. But I did find on stream recently some opportunities with like controlling zone size and stuff like that that gave me a little bit of a different perspective. In fact, I would really recommend trying to play the game with unlocks, like just unlock everything and build a city as if you were playing heavily modded Cities 1, if that's something you're interested in, and seeing how that plays like into how you're building, because it definitely changed a little bit of my perspective. And I've done it a little bit, like I already had a city built where I tried that, but then I started one today and I slowed down my build process. And it was way interesting how I was laying things out a little bit differently and trying some different things. So earlier we talked about using parking lots and adding on to areas that need that sort of space for parking. So we're going to go ahead and put in a high school here at the tail end of our suburb. And I'm going to set this up so that we can, continue to develop the sort of education side of our city. And one thing I've been doing is using some alleyways to create, just different roads in especially these areas where it's almost like a campus, if that makes sense. And then try to incorporate areas where you have a little bit of pedestrian pathing in between maybe some of your parking lots, or between the building and a side road or whatever. So it becomes a campus. It becomes a little bit larger than just the thing you're placing down. So while I'm happy that we got rid of some of the magnetic aspects of how pedestrian pathing works, I do wish you could blend it more easily in with something along the lines of a building asset or a pathing that is attached to the building asset. So like the high school here, like we have the paths already built. I wish we could at least match those paths to make it more consistent. I'm hoping that's something that we'll see later on. I love the opportunity to be able to expand that little campus look, and have it all blend together as I'm building what I think is my own campus, right? Something else you have to keep in mind when you're setting up some of these buildings is space for other assets. Because obviously there's modular building, so you're going to have some extra stuff that you have to apply to this, which can create some interesting scenarios, because pretty much every modular building piece that I've placed down never fits where I think it's going to fit. I also wish you could separate it by a road. Again, hopefully these are things we might see later on. Maybe if something like Move It or whatever is incorporated into Cities 2, that would give us a little bit more freedom, I think, in terms of how we place things. But having this like one like alleyway over would be perfect, this whole stadium thing. But I guess one day we'll get there. So I know today was a lot of bouncing around to smaller projects, some of which I think will begin to add that personality we discussed to the city itself. And that was largely our discussion, was just talking about finding those things to add to your city. So if you have ideas or suggestions, please throw them in the comments down below. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know it was a pretty relaxed one. So have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you next time.